Have you ever walked into a room expecting warmth, only to feel the air settle cold and still like winter sunlight through dusty glass? I remember the exact night I learned what it meant to be truly invisible in your own family story. My name is Samantha Pierce Sam, if you ask the handful of people who know me well, and on the evening of my 35th birthday, I found myself sitting alone at a window table set for 5. The city lights blinked beyond the glass reflections shimmering in my untouched water glass. For years I'd carried this picture in my mind, laughter clinking glasses, the comfort of belonging. But that night, all I could hear was the quiet hush of my own breath, and the clumsy way hope can catch in your chest when you're still waiting for someone to walk through the door. I wish I could say that was the first time I felt out of place, or that the hurt came out of nowhere. The truth is, most storms start as a trickle, a missed call, a forgotten thank you, an empty seat at a celebration you planned yourself. I'd spent my life believing that loyalty and love were enough, that if I kept giving eventually I'd be seen for who I was and not just what I could do for everyone else. Looking back, I think many of us make that same mistake. Maybe you know the feeling, you're the fixer, the helper, the first to show up, and the last to leave, hoping that one day all your silent sacrifices will matter to someone. But the hardest lessons often come quietly, one disappointment at a time, until you're sitting in that restaurant looking at your phone, wondering why it suddenly feels so heavy in your hand. What happened next wasn't just a single betrayal, but the unraveling of years of unspoken agreements. Tiny threads I never realized I'd been tying together for everyone but myself. That night, while the candle on my untouched cake flickered in a draft, I couldn't stop. A message arrived, a family photo, all of them smiling somewhere else, celebrating a moment that had nothing to do with me. No apology, no explanation, just a reminder that sometimes the people you love most can leave you out without even noticing. And in that moment, something inside me shifted. I realized that belonging shouldn't come with conditions, and love shouldn't be measured by how much you're willing to lose yourself for it. So if you've ever been the strong one, the dependable one, the person everyone calls when things go wrong, but forgets when things go right, this story is for you. Over the next hour, I want to share with you not just what happened to me, but the truths I wish someone had told me sooner. We'll walk through the memories, the mistakes, and most importantly, the moments of quiet courage that slowly taught me how to choose myself, even when it meant standing alone. Because sometimes the only way to be seen is to finally stop hiding in the background of your own life. Before we begin, I'd love to know, have you ever felt invisible in a room full of people who should know you best? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your story matters too, and maybe by sharing, we'll all feel a little less alone. Let's start from that night and see where this journey leads us, one honest step at a time. There's something quietly hopeful about making a reservation for a table big enough to fit everyone you love. That night, I had asked for a window seat and told the hostess 5, "Please, my family is joining soon." I still remember the way her smile didn't waver, even when she noticed I was alone. I spent the first few minutes fussing with the place settings, making sure everyone's fork was straight, knife at the right angle, old habits from years of planning family dinners, always hoping everything would be just right. The restaurant was softly lit with gentle music playing overhead. The kind of place my dad would have loved, the kind of place I hoped my mother would call classy. Every time the door chimed, my heart skipped, convinced that this would be the moment my family would sweep in arms full of laughter and apologies for being late. As the minutes turned into an hour, I did my best to convince myself that nothing was wrong. My phone sat face up on the table, the screen stubbornly blank. I checked and rechecked for messages blaming the city's spotty reception, the possibility of a family emergency, even ridiculously a broken watch. I ordered drinks. I didn't want appetizers I barely touched, just to give myself something to do besides wait. The waiter was kind, too kind. He asked quietly if I'd still be needing all 5 seats, and I smiled a little too brightly. Yes, of course. My family, they always show up eventually. I wanted to believe it. I needed to believe it. Because the truth is, it's easier to hope than to face the ache of being forgotten. Maybe you've had a moment like that too, a celebration planned in your head only to find yourself alone, replaying old memories for comfort. I remembered other nights, the time my sister Lily won her first art contest, and we filled the same restaurant with our cheers. The way my mom would lean in and whisper look at us, just like the movies when the dessert tray arrived. It's funny the things you cling to when you're hurting. I scrolled through photos on my phone, reminders of birthdays and Thanksgivings, past searching for proof that I wasn't just making this family up in my mind. Surely I thought you can't lose something that was never really yours. But loneliness has a way of rewriting history, making you question every happy moment. When my phone finally buzzed, I nearly dropped it. The message was from my cousin Ben, an image loading slowly then all at once. There they were, Mom, Lily, Aunt Ruth. Ben himself all huddled together at a different restaurant, wine glasses, raised faces flushed with happiness. My sister stood front and center holding up her painting and a tiny blue ribbon. The caption read, "So proud of you, Lily family always celebrates together," underneath a string of heart emojis. I sat staring at the screen for a long time, my own reflection wavering in the glass. There was no mention of me, no sorry, no explanation. Just a celebration I hadn't been invited to, a family tradition I suddenly realized had rules I didn't understand. I wish I could tell you that I was angry, that I swept the plates off the table, marched out into the street, and slammed the door on my family forever. But in truth, I just sat very still, letting the sting of it wash over me. The hardest part wasn't the exclusion. It was the realization that my absence hadn't changed anything for them. They laughed, they toasted, they moved on all, while I was left rearranging knives and forks for a meal no one else would share. If you've ever felt like the background character in your own story, you know how quietly devastating that can be. As the evening wore on, the waiter brought my entree steak medium rare, just the way I liked it. I took a bite, barely tasting anything, my mind whirling. In that strange, surreal moment, I found myself thinking of all the times I'd shown up for my family late-night phone calls to calm Lily's nerves before exams, picking up groceries for Mom when she was sick, covering last-minute expenses so no one else would have to worry. I'd always believed that if I just kept giving, kept being the reliable one, they'd remember to include me when it mattered most. But maybe I'd misunderstood the rules all along. Maybe I was only visible when someone needed something, and invisible the rest of the time. I looked around the restaurant, watching other families laugh and talk, each one tangled up in their own little universe of inside jokes and shared history. I wondered how many of them had someone like me, the planner, the fixer, the one who made sure everyone else was comfortable before even thinking of herself. There's an old saying, you teach people how to treat you, and that night I felt the weight of every lesson I'd ever given without meaning to. By always showing up, always smoothing things over, I'd made it easy for everyone to forget that I was there by choice, not obligation. A lesson began to settle quietly inside me, the kind that only comes when you finally run out of excuses for other people. Sometimes we keep pouring love and effort into a cup with a hole in the bottom, hoping one day it will finally fill up. But all the hope in the world can't change the shape of the cup, or the willingness of others to notice when you've run dry. Sitting at that table, I realized I had a choice. I could keep waiting for my family to value me, or I could start valuing myself enough to stop waiting. It wasn't an easy decision, and it certainly didn't happen all at once. That night, I paid the bill, left a generous tip for the staff who had quietly ignored my loneliness, and stepped out into the chilly evening air. I walked home under the city's blinking lights, the silence of my footsteps, a strange comfort. For the first time, I let myself feel everything. The disappointment, the grief, the small flicker of relief that came from finally seeing things as they were not as I wished they would be. If there's a lesson in that night, it's this. Sometimes the people you count on most can let you down, not because they're cruel, but because they've never had to wonder how it feels to be left behind. It's easy to love people who need you. It's harder to love yourself enough to recognize when it's time to stop begging for a seat at their table. Looking back, I wish someone had told me that your worth isn't measured by how much you sacrifice or how quietly you carry other people's happiness on your shoulders. As I climbed the steps to my apartment, a strange sense of freedom washed over me. I wasn't sure what would come next, but I knew I couldn't go back to being the invisible one, the dependable background character in a family story that never seemed to include me. I poured myself a cup of tea and sat by the window, letting the night settle softly around me. Outside, the city kept moving, oblivious to my small heartbreak, but full of possibility all the same. And that's where this story truly begins, not at the moment of being left out, but in the quiet, determined decision to rewrite what comes next. The hardest step is always the first, choosing to see yourself. Really see yourself even when others do not. As I drifted to sleep that night, I promised myself that things would change, not all at once, not perfectly, but enough. Enough to finally make room for myself at my own table. Little did I know, the hardest and most beautiful lessons were still ahead. But that's a story for another night, and the beginning of a journey I hope you'll take with me. If you ask anyone in my family, they'll tell you I was always the strong one. That's how my story was written from the very beginning, inked into every family memory, whether I agreed or not. After my father passed away when I was 12, a silent shift happened inside our house, a reshuffling of roles so quiet it almost seemed natural. My mother, Ruth, was suddenly weighed down by grief and bills, and my little sister, Lily, only 6, clung to me for comfort in the night. I stepped in, not because anyone asked, but because I couldn't stand the sound of her crying in the dark. People say resilience is a gift, but I sometimes wonder if it's just what happens when you have no other choice. The years blurred into each other, a steady rhythm of, "I'll handle it, and don't worry, I've got this." I gave up the scholarship I'd earned for an out-of-state university so I could stay close and help. I juggled 2 part-time jobs through college racing, from classes to the checkout line at the grocery store, never letting on how tired I was. Every birthday party, every holiday meal, every time the car broke down or the rent came up short, it was always me who quietly filled in the gaps. At first, I wore this badge of responsibility with pride. I told myself it meant I was needed, that my family couldn't do without me. It took a long time to see that needed is not the same as valued. Sometimes I look back at old photos, Lily with cake icing on her chin, Mom holding a bouquet at my high school graduation, our tiny living room strung with dollar store streamers, and realize just how invisible my efforts became over time. I remember the Christmas Eve when I was 17. I spent all afternoon baking cookies, wrapping gifts with money from my waitressing job, making sure everyone else had a magical holiday. When my mother toasted the joy of family, she didn't mention my name, but praised Lily for singing a carol at the church service. I smiled, clapped, and did the dishes. It's funny how 1,000 tiny moments like that can stitch themselves into your heart, forming a patchwork of silent hurts. It's not just my story. I've read about women all over America, eldest daughters, single moms, grandmothers who shoulder the same unspoken weight. A friend of mine, Emily, once told me how she drove across 3 states in a snowstorm just to fix her brother's broken heater because he'd fall apart without me. Another Maria laughed that her family called her the glue, but never asked what kept her from falling apart. There's a term for it, I learned: eldest daughter syndrome, a phenomenon where the firstborn girl is cast as the caretaker, the peacemaker, the one who absorbs every shockwave so others don't have to. It's so common, there are books and podcasts devoted to breaking free from its grip. But these invisible strings pull tight. I told myself that if I kept showing up one day, it would get easier. I'd feel seen finally for the countless ways I made life softer for everyone else. Instead, I became so good at being strong that no one remembered to ask if I ever felt weak. My mother worried endlessly about Lily's allergies, Ben's homework, Ruth's loneliness, but she rarely asked how I was sleeping or if I could use a day off. I played the part so well that even I forgot I was acting. The danger of being the strong one is that you become a convenient solution for everyone else's problems, a soft landing that no one thinks twice about using. The calls came at midnight. Sam, Lily needs a ride home, or Sam, do you mind helping me with the taxes? I never said no. I baked casseroles for neighbors, covered Ben's school fees, and even organized Mom's 50th birthday party when she was too tired to care. Each time I told myself it was just for now, just until things got better. But just for now turned into a decade. I started noticing that when I did say no, when I needed space or rest, my family grew quiet, then resentful. They called me moody, ungrateful, or too busy for her own blood. The world expects women to give and keep giving, rarely pausing to ask what it costs them. I saw it in my colleagues too. Working mothers who skipped lunch to pick up a sick child, older sisters who sent half their paychecks home. We live in a culture that praises sacrifice, but overlooks the toll it takes on the soul. If there's a lesson tucked into these years, it's that strength is often mistaken for a bottomless well. But every well can run dry, especially when it's filled only from within. Being the dependable one doesn't mean you're immune to exhaustion. It just means you're good at hiding it. For a long time, I confused being strong with being loved. I thought that the more I gave, the more indispensable I'd become, and the closer my family would hold me. Instead, I became the scaffolding for everyone else's dreams, never quite building anything for myself. Looking back, I wish I'd understood sooner that love built on obligation is fragile. True connection grows from mutual care, not endless self-sacrifice. If you're always the rescuer, you leave no room for others to step up to learn to value your presence as something precious, not just convenient. In families, as in life, it's easy to confuse loyalty with losing yourself. As I moved through those years, I clung to the belief that all my efforts would one day pay off. I'd see it in a spontaneous hug from Lily, a heartfelt thank you from Mom, a moment when someone else took the reins so I could rest. There were moments fleeting as they were that hinted at something better, a gentle touch on my shoulder, a whispered, "I couldn't have done it without you." But mostly, gratitude was silent, and recognition was rare. It's hard not to grow tired in the shadows. And yet these invisible strings, the ones that held me in place sometimes felt like they might break, were also what tethered me to a sense of purpose. I wanted to believe that if I let go, everything would fall apart. That's the greatest myth of being the strong one, the fear that if you stop holding it all together, you'll lose not just your place in the family, but the family itself. I had to learn the hard way that true belonging isn't something you earn by overextending yourself, it's something you deserve simply by being you. As the years pressed on, I started to wonder what would happen if I loosened my grip. Would my family collapse, or would they finally find their own strength? That question haunted me in quiet moments in the hush after everyone left the table, in the emptiness that followed each celebration. It was a question I was too scared to answer, at least not yet. But as the weight of responsibility grew heavier, so did my curiosity about what life could look like if I dared to set it down even for a little while. And so, as one chapter closed on that lonely dinner, another quietly opened a chapter where I began to see the limits of my strength and the quiet, radical power of asking, "What about me?" The road to that question wouldn't be easy, but I'd finally begun to imagine that maybe, just maybe, it was worth taking. Money has a strange way of slipping between the cracks of love and loyalty, making things complicated, even when all you want is to help. For most of my adult life, my bank account was a living timeline of my family's emergencies, dreams, and everyday stumbles. I never questioned where my paycheck would go. It simply stretched as far as it could until everyone else's worries seemed lighter. When Mom's old sedan finally broke down for good, I was the one who took out a loan for her new car, signing my name with hands that shook just a little. When Lily called crying that she'd missed a tuition payment, it was my savings that rescued her from late fees. And when Aunt Ruth's roof started leaking in the middle of a freezing winter, it was me who wrote the check to fix it, telling myself that's just what families do. Looking back, I realize how quickly generosity can become an expectation. There was never a formal agreement, never a thank you, but you really don't have to. It was always assumed I would step in. At first, I didn't mind. There's a comfort in being the one who fixes things, a secret pride in knowing you're the safety net. But over time, those little rescues became routine. Requests stopped coming with explanations or apologies. Sometimes they arrived as simple statements. "I need you to cover this month's insurance," or "Can you Venmo me for groceries?" I can still hear my mother's voice, soft, almost embarrassed but certain. "Just until I get paid, honey. You know you're a lifesaver." I know my story isn't unique. In America, they call it the sandwich generation people, especially women caught between supporting aging parents and younger siblings, all while trying to build their own future. A friend, Melissa, once told me she joked about being her family's ATM, but underneath she felt angry, drained, and somehow ashamed for even noticing. I've read articles about first-generation children paying off their parents' mortgages before they ever buy their own homes. In every story, the lines between love and duty, help and obligation, get blurry. Money, which should have been a tool for comfort or opportunity, instead becomes a silent measure of who cares more, who is willing to give until it hurts. The hardest part was realizing my efforts didn't always strengthen our bond. Sometimes money made things more transactional. I noticed how gratitude faded as support became habitual. When I covered Lily's second semester fees, she barely thanked me more, focused on the classes she'd been able to take. When I paid for Ben's soccer camp, my aunt simply texted back a thumbs-up emoji. At first I thought I was just being sensitive, but as the years went on, I wondered, was my help drawing us closer or making me invisible? It's a question many caregivers face. When does love stop being a gift and start feeling like a bargain? There were bright moments too. One December, Lily surprised me with a handmade scarf and a note, "For all the ways you keep me warm." For a moment, my heart soared. I kept that scarf for years, even when the yarn started to unravel. But those gestures grew fewer as the routine of support took hold. More and more, my generosity was met with expectation, not appreciation. I learned the hard way that in families, just as in life, gratitude needs to be nurtured, or it fades like sunlight at the end of the day. I remember the first time I tried to say no. It was a rainy Tuesday, the kind where everything feels heavy. Mom called asking if I could cover the utility bill just this once. I hesitated. I was behind on my own rent, working overtime to catch up. My silence stretched on the phone, awkward and unfamiliar. "Sam," she pressed. In that moment, guilt flooded me, guilt for needing my own paycheck, guilt for not jumping to help, guilt for even hesitating. I caved as usual, but the uneasy feeling lingered long after. I realized I was teaching everyone, including myself, that my needs were always secondary. A lesson quietly crept into my awareness. When you give without boundaries, people stop recognizing that what you offer is a choice, not a requirement. We all want to believe our sacrifices are seen, that they matter. But I was beginning to suspect my family only noticed my absence, never my presence. If I faltered, they grew anxious or resentful, but as long as I delivered, they assumed I would always be there, wallet open, heart on my sleeve. I started talking about this with other women, colleagues, friends, even acquaintances at the gym. Their stories echoed my own, paying for siblings' debts, loaning money that was never repaid, feeling caught between love and resentment. "It's what good daughters do," one friend sighed. But what about being good to ourselves? When does care cross the line into self-neglect? These questions haunted me as I combed through years of bank statements, realizing just how much of my future I'd quietly traded away. Still, a part of me wanted to believe that all this giving would one day be acknowledged, that one day Mom would look me in the eye and say, "You did enough," that Lily would realize how much I'd set aside for her dreams. But as the pattern repeated, I had to face a difficult truth. Sometimes the more you give, the less people feel they have to give in return. Love untethered from respect and gratitude risks becoming manipulation, a way for others to get what they want without seeing what it costs you. If there's a lesson here, it's this: generosity should be an act of connection, not currency. When you help out of love but receive only expectation in return, you risk losing not only your savings, but also your sense of self-worth. I wish I'd known sooner that saying no is an act of self-respect, not selfishness. True love can survive disappointment, and real relationships don't dissolve when the money runs dry. As I reflected on these hard truths, a quiet resolve began to grow. I realized I was not alone. There were countless others learning how to set boundaries, how to honor their own needs without apology. Maybe I thought it was time to test what would happen if I stopped being the bank and started being simply myself. That decision would come with its own storms, but I was ready to find out who I was when I stopped trying to buy my way into my family's love. And so, as winter settled in, I faced the next chapter not with anger or bitterness, but with a hopeful curiosity. What if the greatest gift I could give was finally letting others stand on their own? The answer I would soon discover was both harder and more liberating than I ever imagined. Sometimes I wonder if invisibility is something you slip into quietly, the way you might slide into a warm bath, not noticing how the heat slowly fades, until all that's left is a chill. Being the strong one in my family came with a kind of background silence. I was present in every photo, yet somehow blurred around the edges. Holidays passed in a familiar swirl, me organizing the gift exchange, setting the table, paying for the turkey or the cake. But as the laughter echoed and the family posed for group photos, I often found myself outside the frame, either holding the camera or busy refilling someone else's glass. Even the thank yous drifted right past me, as if gratitude was reserved for those who did less, who simply showed up and enjoyed. One Thanksgiving stands out. I spent the week preparing cleaning Mom's apartment, baking pies, fielding texts about dietary restrictions, last-minute errands. That night after the meal, my mother stood to make a toast. She praised Lily for her new art exhibit, Ben for his good grades, Aunt Ruth for keeping everyone's spirits up. She even thanked the family dog for not begging at the table. My name never left her lips. I smiled, raised my glass, and did the dishes while everyone else settled in for dessert. It's easy to rationalize this kind of oversight. They just forgot I'd tell myself next time will be different. But the ache settled deeper each year, hardening into something I couldn't ignore. It's not just my experience. When I shared these moments with friends, they nodded in knowing agreement. My colleague Janet once said, "It's like, if your competent people stop seeing you, you become the solution, not a person." I read an article on invisible labor and saw myself in every line, the woman who arranges, organizes, soothes, and pays, but is rarely acknowledged. In families, especially, the reliable person fades into the background, their efforts camouflaged by routine. My friend Carla, the eldest of 4, laughed once that the only time her family noticed her absence was when something went wrong. The trouble with being overlooked is that it doesn't happen all at once. It's a slow process marked by little things, a missed invitation, a joke you're not part of a family decision made without you. Over time, I started to shrink not physically, but in spirit. I stopped suggesting movies for family night, stopped volunteering for every task. I waited to see if anyone would step in or even notice. Often they didn't. It was as if my usefulness had become my entire identity, and without it, I simply vanished from their attention. There were bright spots, rare and sweet. Once Lily left a note on my pillow after I helped her move. "I'd be lost without you." That scrap of paper lived in my wallet for months, proof that I mattered even if just for a moment. But mostly my value was measured in tasks, completed, problem solved. If I didn't organize the group chat for Mom's birthday, no one else would. If I didn't bring the candles, the cake sat unlit. I started to wonder, had I created this? By always being available, had I taught them to overlook me, to assume I'd handle everything, so they didn't have to? It's a common trap for helpers everywhere. In trying to make things easier for others, we make ourselves unnecessary except as functionaries. There's even research on this, how women in particular are expected to hold up the sky, but rarely get a thank you for not letting it fall. It's not intentional cruelty. Most families aren't even aware. But over time, it chips away at your sense of belonging until you're left wondering if you're loved for who you are or just what you provide. One summer, I decided to experiment. I let go of the reins. When Mom's birthday rolled around, I didn't send out reminders, didn't organize the potluck, didn't buy the decorations. I watched as the day approached. The family chat went silent until the night before when someone asked, "Wait, are we doing something?" That year the celebration was a haphazard pizza delivery. No candles, no speeches. Mom seemed bewildered but tried to hide her disappointment. I felt both guilty and vindicated proof that my efforts mattered, even if they were invisible, until they were gone. That lesson was as bittersweet as it was necessary. Sometimes you have to step away from the center to see who will step in. The truth is, the people who rely on you most are often the slowest to notice when you're gone until something important is missing. It doesn't make them bad people. It's just human nature to grow comfortable with what's always been there. But comfort isn't the same as connection, and presence isn't the same as love. Slowly, I learned to set boundaries. I started to say no, not with anger, but with kindness. "I can't host this time, but I'm happy to bring dessert." Or, "Let's all chip in for groceries this year." It wasn't easy at first. Some family members reacted with confusion, even irritation. But I reminded myself that I was allowed to take up space to be more than a background character. I was allowed to ask for help to receive as well as give. These were small changes, but over time they added up to something powerful, a sense that I was worthy of care too. The hardest part of this journey was learning to value myself even when others didn't. To believe that I was more than my usefulness, that I had a right to rest, to joy, to recognition. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, or in any group, you know how lonely that realization can be. But you're not alone. There are millions of us quietly doing the work, holding up the sky, hoping someone will finally look up and see us standing there. One evening, as I sat by my window sipping tea and watching the world outside, I promised myself to stop waiting for permission to be seen, to show up for myself even when others didn't. I started journaling, recording not just my frustrations, but also my small victories, moments when I said no, when I let others pick up the slack, when I felt proud simply for existing, not for achieving. I realized that visibility isn't something others give you. It's something you claim for yourself one day at a time. That was the beginning of a deeper transformation. I was still the same person, caring, capable, generous, but I was no longer willing to disappear for the sake of others' comfort. My presence was a gift, not a given. And slowly, quietly, I began to wonder what my life could look like if I stopped living in the background and started stepping into the light. That question would soon guide me toward a new kind of freedom and the courage to let go of old patterns, even if it meant risking the discomfort of those I loved most. The next part of my story unfolded in the small, tense moments when I finally reached my breaking point, when love, duty, and self-respect collided. But it was those invisible years, those overlooked efforts, that gave me the clarity to choose something different. Sometimes the path to being seen begins with the simple act of stepping back, letting the silence fill the space, and waiting to see what grows in its place. The breaking point, I've learned, rarely arrives in one grand cinematic moment. More often, it creeps up quietly, years of small cuts and silent disappointments gathering, until suddenly you find you can't take another step on the same worn path. For me, the moment everything shifted was both ordinary and extraordinary. It happened on a Wednesday morning in early spring, the kind of day where sunlight slants gently through your kitchen window, and you almost believe that life is as simple as a cup of coffee and a slice of toast. I was paying bills at my tiny dining table, scrolling through balances, when I noticed my savings account was lower than I remembered. A withdrawal had been made, a sizable one. I stared at the line item, confusion turning slowly to dread. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed. It was Mom, sounding casual, even cheerful. "Oh, I forgot to mention I needed to cover Lily's medical bill, so I borrowed a little from your account. Hope that's okay, sweetheart." Her words tumbled out like it was nothing, a tiny inconvenience in the stream of our lives. But for me, something inside snapped. I tried to answer her gently, but my voice shook. "Mom, you can't just take my money without asking." There was a pause, then a sigh. "Oh, honey, it's family. We all help each other." The conversation spiraled from there, shifting into familiar territory, reminders of all I'd been given, guilt trips about loyalty and subtle jabs about how I'd changed lately. I hung up feeling hollowed out, as if some invisible thread that had always connected us had finally frayed. I paced my small living room, replaying her words. Was I wrong to feel violated? Wasn't family supposed to share everything? For years, I'd believed that love meant giving without boundaries, but now I saw the cost. I had lost track of where my generosity ended and my self-respect began. That afternoon, I called Lily, hoping for some reassurance, but she was curt. "I needed help. You always say yes." That stung in a way I didn't expect. My kindness had become a shortcut, a habit that no one valued enough to even acknowledge. I know my story isn't unusual. I've talked to women across America, old friends, new acquaintances, even strangers online who've described similar moments. A parent borrowing money without warning, a sibling expecting childcare for free, an aunt assuming you'll drop everything for one more favor. "But you're so good at it," they say, as if capability is permission. We live in a culture that rewards caretaking but punishes those who dare to draw a line. I remembered a coworker, Carla, who confessed she felt selfish for refusing to lend her brother rent money for the third time, even though he'd never paid her back. We both laughed at how twisted it was, how easily love and guilt become tangled. That week I struggled with a storm of feelings: anger, sadness, fear, and a surprising sense of relief. Anger that my boundaries had been crossed. Sadness for the little girl inside me who thought being good meant being generous. Fear that I'd become the villain in my own family story. And relief because for the first time I could finally see the pattern, how my willingness to help had become the foundation of everyone else's comfort, and how little space there was for my own needs. Eventually I sat down with Mom and Lily. I spoke quietly, my hands shaking, but I didn't back down. I love you both, but I can't keep giving like this. I need you to ask before taking my things. I need you to understand how it feels. The conversation did not go well. Mom wept, accusing me of being cold, of forgetting everything she'd done for me. Lily said I was overreacting. Even Aunt Ruth chimed in by text, scolding me for putting myself first. It hurt a deep, raw ache, but I held my ground. Later, I cried in the shower, letting the water muffle the sound. For the first time, I didn't rush to fix things. I let the discomfort sit. If there's a lesson in all of this, it's that boundaries are not walls. They're bridges meant to connect, not to cut off. Healthy boundaries teach those we love how to treat us, and they teach us how to value ourselves. I'd spent decades thinking love meant saying yes to everything, but sometimes the greatest act of love is saying no to overextending, no to resentment, no to letting others treat you as a resource instead of a person. It's not selfish to honor your own needs. It's a form of self-respect that makes genuine connection possible. In the days that followed, the house felt quieter. The phone calls slowed. My family retreated, licking their wounds, and I sat with the silence, unsure what would come next. It was uncomfortable, even scary. I worried I'd pushed too hard, that I'd lost them for good. But as I moved through my routines, watering my plants, walking in the park, cooking simple dinners, I felt a strange new energy building inside me. I was no longer weighed down by the constant anticipation of the next request, the next crisis. I had space at last to think about what I wanted. I started journaling, writing down every time I felt tempted to apologize, every moment I doubted myself. I listed the things I'd done for others and the things I wanted for myself. Slowly, my life began to feel like my own again. I reached out to friends who'd walked similar paths, and we traded stories, advice, encouragement. I discovered there was a whole world beyond the cycle of giving and guilt, a world where women built each other up and reminded each other that no is a complete sentence. The family did not heal overnight. There were tense dinners, awkward silences, and long stretches without contact. But something had shifted. I was different now, more honest, more self-assured, more compassionate toward myself. I realized that the breaking point wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of a new chapter. A chapter where I could show up for my family without disappearing, where I could give without losing myself. As the weeks turned into months, I became curious what else might change if I stopped measuring my worth by what I could provide. The answer I sensed would lead me deeper into the heart of what it means to belong, not as the strong one, but as a whole person worthy of care, respect, and love. And so with equal parts fear and hope, I stepped forward, ready to see what came next. The days after setting my boundaries felt like drifting through uncharted water. The silence that followed my refusal was new, heavy, dense, not quite empty, but filled with everything unspoken. For years, our family conversations had been punctuated by little emergencies and endless favors. Now, as the requests dried up, I realized just how much of our connection was built on my willingness to say yes. Each time my phone buzzed, I half expected another demand or a guilt-tinged message. Instead, I found long pauses, clipped replies, and on some days, nothing at all. The most surprising thing was how quickly resentment grew. Lily stopped sending me her daily updates, switching to group chats, where I felt more like a bystander than a sister. Mom, once so quick to call about small things, kept our conversations brief, her tone brittle. Aunt Ruth, who had always been a champion of family, first texted only to say how much everyone missed the old Sam. Even family friends seemed to pull away as if my boundaries were contagious, a warning to anyone else who dared to upset the delicate balance of give and take. It's strange how families adapt to imbalance, how the role of caretaker can become so expected that any hint of change feels like betrayal. I heard echoes of this from others too. My friend Andrea recounted how after she finally said no to lending her cousin more money, the cousin stopped speaking to her for months. It's as if I broke some unspoken contract, Andrea told me, like love only flowed one way, and I was the faucet. We laughed a little sadly at how true that felt. For women especially, the cultural script is clear. Good daughters, sisters, and friends are supposed to give endlessly and without complaint. The fallout in my own life wasn't just emotional, it was practical too. Mom's electricity bill went unpaid until she asked Ben, my younger cousin, for help. He sent her money reluctantly and grumbled about it for weeks. Lily, after missing a car payment, was forced to ask a friend for a ride to work. These moments stung, but they also revealed something important: the family survived. The world didn't end. Others stepped up, even if only out of necessity. The lesson was as sharp as it was liberating. By stepping back, I gave space for others to learn responsibility, to grow, to find their own solutions. But the guilt was real, and sometimes overwhelming. Late at night, doubts crowded my mind. Was I being too harsh? Had I pushed too far? Old habits die hard, and there were days I ached to smooth things over to be needed again. When the holidays came, I debated whether to bring an elaborate dessert as usual or just show up with store-bought cookies. I chose the latter. No one commented. I felt oddly free and a little lost. My family's disappointment lingered in the air, but so did my relief. I learned something essential during this period. Boundaries don't end relationships, but they do change them. Sometimes that means relationships fade. But the connections that remain, that can withstand honesty and limits, grow stronger in the long run. My friend Carla, who had once been the go-to for her siblings, told me that after months of silence, her brother called to apologize. It was awkward, but it was real, she said. We finally talked as equals, not as giver and taker. That gave me hope. One of the hardest lessons was that not everyone would understand or accept my new boundaries. Some people would call me selfish. Some would drift away. But I realized that the people who truly cared would find their way back, not because I made their lives easier, but because they valued me for who I was. That understanding helped me weather the loneliness. I took up new hobbies, joined a book club, and spent more time with friends who respected my limits. The more I practiced saying no, the easier it became, and the more room I found for things that genuinely brought me joy. During this time, I began to rebuild my sense of self. I wrote about my feelings, processing the grief and anger that surfaced. I talked openly with friends and a therapist, learning to name what I needed without apology. I made a list of the things I'd given up: quiet mornings, financial security weekends, free from obligation, and started to reclaim them bit by bit. Self-respect, I realized, isn't something you earn by sacrificing for others. It's something you practice by showing up for yourself again and again. Looking back, the fallout from setting boundaries was both painful and necessary. It was the price of honesty, a reckoning with years of unbalanced love. I wish I could say it got easier right away, but the truth is, it was a slow process. 1 step forward, 2 steps back. But even in the hardest moments, I could feel something shifting: a deeper sense of freedom, a clearer voice in my own life, a growing belief that I deserved more than just a supporting role in my own story. If you've ever worried about losing people by standing up for yourself, let me say this: the ones who matter will find a way to love you with your boundaries intact. The rest will make room for the life you are meant to build. It's not a perfect process, but it's a worthy one. As I moved through this season of distance and change, a new possibility began to emerge. If I could endure the discomfort of the fallout, what might be waiting on the other side? Was there a different kind of relationship possible? One based not on obligation, but on mutual care. I was beginning to hope so. And so, with cautious optimism, I prepared myself for the next step: the work of healing, rebuilding, and learning what it truly means to belong on my own terms. When the dust settled and the routines of obligation faded, I found myself face to face with something far more daunting than silence reflection. Without the noise of constant demands, the days grew quieter, and in that quiet memories rose like bubbles in still water. I saw myself not just as I was, but as I'd been, each version shaped by choices, losses, and a longing to matter. It's strange how much you can discover when you finally have the space to listen to your own heart. I began to write it first out of habit, then out of need. My journal became a map of invisible years, lists of birthdays, remembered bills, paid holidays, organized emergencies soothed. On one page, I tallied the dollars spent. On another, the apologies swallowed. But soon I started cataloging something else, the little moments I'd set aside, the times I'd wanted to say no and said yes. Instead, the dreams deferred for the sake of keeping the peace. It was a mosaic of invisible effort, each tile evidence that I'd loved sometimes too much and rarely enough for myself. There was grief in this process, an ache for the girl who learned too young that approval must be earned. I saw clearly now how my need to be needed had shaped every relationship. My family's reliance on me didn't happen by accident. It was the result of years of unspoken agreements, small and large, in which I traded my comfort for their ease. I remembered the night Mom broke down in tears after Dad died, and how I'd vowed silently to never let her feel alone again. I remembered Lily's teenage years, her wild swings between rebellion and affection, and how I'd played the steady anchor she could always return to. Every promise I kept wove me tighter into their safety net, but slowly unraveled the threads of my own dreams. The more I reflected, the more I understood how universal my story was. In therapy, my counselor called it enmeshment, a pattern where boundaries blur and one person's needs eclipse another's. She explained that this is common in families shaped by loss or hardship, where survival demands cooperation, but sometimes goes too far. I thought of friends who had become second parents to siblings, or whose parents leaned on them for emotional support. We traded stories, laughed at the absurdity of apologizing for needing a break, and reminded each other that love without boundaries isn't really love at all. One day I found myself reading about women who'd made similar journeys. In a memoir, a woman described finally stepping back after years of caretaking and how guilty and liberated she felt. In a podcast, a guest spoke about reparenting herself, learning to provide the care and comfort she'd always given to others. Their words felt like a lifeline, proof that healing wasn't just possible, it was happening all around me. I let those stories echo in my mind, letting them guide me gently toward self-compassion. I realized that rewriting my narrative would mean giving myself permission to grieve not just for the things I'd lost, but also for the time I could never get back. There's a mourning that comes with change, letting go of old patterns. Even harmful ones means facing the empty space they leave behind. Some days, I filled that space with small joys, a walk in the park, a cup of tea, a movie no one else wanted to see. I let myself rest without guilt, savoring the freedom to make choices for myself no matter how insignificant they seemed. Slowly, new dreams began to take root. I remembered my love for painting, neglected since college, and bought a set of watercolors on a whim. I joined a community class, nervous at first, but found myself lost in the gentle rhythm of brush on paper. The first painting I finished was simple, a sun rising over a quiet lake, soft light spilling across the water. It felt like a promise of new beginnings, of beauty born from stillness. For the first time in years, I felt a spark of pride that had nothing to do with being useful to anyone else. Along the way, I learned a crucial lesson. It's not enough to recognize the patterns that hold us back. We must also create new ones to carry us forward. Rewriting your story is work, but it's the kind of work that heals. I practiced setting small boundaries with friends, with family, even with myself. I said yes only when I meant it, and no when I needed to. At first it felt unnatural, awkward, even selfish. But with each choice my voice grew stronger, my sense of self a little clearer. Of course not everyone understood my transformation. Some family members were bewildered. Others were quietly hurt. But a few surprised me, Lily especially, who called one evening just to ask how I was. She listened, really listened as I shared my fears and hopes. We talked for hours, no requests, no drama, just two sisters finding new ways to connect. That conversation was a gift proof that relationships can change, that love can survive honesty and even distance. As I look back now, the mirror shows not just a woman shaped by responsibility, but someone learning to live for herself. My story is still unfolding. There are days I stumble, days I miss the comfort of old habits. But I know this much true belonging isn't built on sacrifice alone. It's built on the courage to be seen, to set limits, and to honor your own heart as much as you honor others. This chapter of reflection was just the beginning. The next step would be even more challenging, rebuilding my life on a foundation of self-trust, seeking joy, not as a reward for service, but as a birthright. I was ready to begin again, not as the fixer or the forgotten, but as the hero of my own story, finally writing a narrative where I mattered most. Rebuilding your life after years of self-sacrifice is less like constructing a brand new house and more like slowly clearing away the rubble after a storm. There's a mess of old habits and expectations to sort through, a mix of hope and hesitation. In those first months, everything felt tentative. Some mornings I'd wake up with a lightness in my chest, grateful for the absence of urgent texts and the quiet possibility of a day that belonged entirely to me. Other mornings, loneliness pressed in heavy and unexpected, a reminder that freedom can sometimes feel like emptiness when you're used to being needed. I started small building routines that centered on my own joy. I dusted off an old yoga mat stretching out on the living room floor as sunlight painted golden stripes across the walls. I cooked meals for one, learning to savor the peace of my own company instead of feeling sorry for the empty chairs at my table. Sometimes I ate standing by the window, watching the world move outside, realizing for the first time how rarely I'd ever paused to notice its gentle rhythms. There was something both strange and beautiful about it, choosing myself quietly each day. One Saturday on a whim, I joined a painting class at the community center. My hands shook with nerves. Would I be good enough? Would I fit in? But the instructor greeted me with a warm smile, and soon I was lost in the soft swirl of colors and the meditative hush of brushes moving over canvas. For 2 hours, there were no emails, no bills to pay, no family emergencies, only the simple act of creating for the sake of creation. I met others there, each with their own reasons for seeking something new. A widower learning to paint landscapes for his grandchildren, a teacher rediscovering her love of art after retirement. Their stories reminded me that reinvention isn't only possible, it's universal. As my world widened, I found courage to explore new friendships. At first, I gravitated toward women with familiar stories, the caretakers, the givers, the ones who always picked up the slack. Over coffee, we shared laughter and hard-earned wisdom, talking openly about boundaries and burnout. We celebrated each other's small victories, saying no to a last-minute favor, taking a weekend trip alone, asking for help without apology. There was relief in knowing I wasn't alone, that healing wasn't a solitary road, but a well-worn path walked by many before me. The process wasn't without setbacks. There were days I questioned my choices, especially when I heard family members grumble about my absence or when old friends drifted away. I had to remind myself that my value didn't hinge on constant giving. When guilt crept in, I returned to my journal, reading old entries that chronicled years of exhaustion. I reread the words of my therapist, "Self-care isn't selfish. It's the foundation for every healthy relationship you'll ever have." That reminder became a mantra, helping me reframe the discomfort as growing pains instead of evidence that I was failing someone. Gradually, I started to dream again. For years, my hopes had been put on hold, crowded out by other people's priorities. Now, I gave myself permission to imagine a future built on my own desires. I made a list: travel to a city I'd always wanted to see, finish the novel I'd started in college, adopt a rescue dog. Some dreams were small, others felt impossibly big, but writing them down made them real, a promise to myself that I was worthy of a life filled with delight and discovery. One of the most powerful lessons I learned was that rebuilding isn't just about adding new things. It's about letting go of what no longer serves you. I decluttered my apartment, donating clothes and kitchenware I'd held onto just in case. I cleaned out old emails, unsubscribed from reminders that made me anxious. With each item that left my home, I felt a little lighter, as if space was finally opening for something new to grow. I started to notice moments of real contentment, the soft weight of a blanket on a chilly evening, the satisfaction of a meal cooked to perfection, the joy of laughter shared with a friend who understood my journey. Along the way, I encountered moments of reconciliation. Lily called one evening, not to ask for anything, but simply to talk. She told me about her new job, her struggles, and small wins, and for the first time in years, I felt seen as a sister, not a resource. Mom's calls became less frequent, but when she did reach out, there was a tenderness in her voice that had been missing for a long time. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest, and that honesty felt more valuable than all the forced closeness of the past. If there's a lesson in all this, it's that healing isn't a destination. It's an ongoing process, a daily choice to be gentle with yourself. Rebuilding takes time, and the road is rarely straight. There are setbacks and doubts days when loneliness returns, or guilt whispers in your ear. But each time you choose yourself, you lay another brick in the foundation of a life that's truly your own. As I continued to explore this new chapter, I realized I was finally living, not just existing. The days no longer revolved around what others needed from me. Instead, they were built on what brought me meaning and peace. I looked around my small apartment at the half-finished painting on the easel, the growing stack of books by my bed, the list of dreams tacked to the fridge, and felt a quiet pride. I was building something lasting a life, a sense of belonging that came from within. The next step, I sensed, would be learning to reconnect on new terms to build relationships grounded in honesty, mutual respect, and joy. Could I trust that love might grow stronger when given space to breathe? As I looked ahead, hope rose in me again, gentle and steady. The hardest work was behind me, but the most beautiful chapters were just beginning. Change in a family doesn't happen all at once. Sometimes it takes weeks, months, or even years for the patterns to shift and for people to really notice what's been missing. After I set boundaries and began rebuilding my life, I braced myself for permanent distance, a quiet, polite space between me and the people I'd once orbited so closely. But life, as I'd come to learn, is rarely so neat. Instead, the smallest ripples of change began to create waves I never expected. One autumn afternoon, as I was returning from a painting class, my phone buzzed with a message from Lily. There was no request for help, no crisis. Just a simple, "Can we talk?" When I called her back, her voice sounded unsure, softer than I remembered. I wanted to say, "Sorry," she began her words, tumbling out in a rush. She admitted how hard things had been since I stepped back. Her car broke down, and she had to take the bus for weeks. Mom struggled with her bills. Aunt Ruth had to pick up extra shifts at the pharmacy. "I always thought things would just work out," Lily said quietly. "Because you were there. I didn't realize how much you did until you stopped." Her honesty caught me off guard. But more than that, it opened a door I hadn't known I was waiting for. It's a strange feeling to be seen truly seen by someone who once took your presence for granted. In Lily's voice, I heard a kind of respect I'd longed for, but never demanded. We talked for hours, not about chores or bills, but about art and dreams and all the ways we'd both changed. For the first time in years, I felt like a sister, not just a fixer. She even laughed, telling me she tried baking my old banana bread recipe and burned it twice. That night, I realized how much lighter love feels when it isn't laced with expectation. A few weeks later, I heard from Mom. Her messages were less frequent these days, but each one carried a sincerity that felt new. She confessed she'd been lonely, that letting go of old habits was harder than she thought. She didn't apologize for everything, and maybe she never would, but she began to share stories from her own youth vulnerabilities she'd kept hidden. We found common ground in our struggles, and though trust took time to rebuild our conversations, we're softer, more honest. There was space for silence, for disagreement, even for awkward pauses, things I'd always rushed to fill before. Our relationship was still fragile, but it was growing into something real, not just familiar. I've learned that it's possible for families to change, but the process can be uncomfortable. Sometimes the only way to create room for growth is to step back, let the dust settle, and allow others to face challenges on their own. It wasn't easy to watch my loved ones stumble, but I realized that protecting them from every hardship was never truly kind. By letting them struggle, I offered them the chance to find their own strength. And slowly, they did. I heard from Aunt Ruth, too. She surprised me with a postcard from the Grand Canyon, a place she'd always wanted to visit but never had time for. "Took your advice, made space for myself for once," she wrote, and I couldn't help but smile. These little changes, these signs of independence, felt like flowers blooming in cracks I thought would never heal. It struck me that sometimes the greatest legacy we leave isn't in what we do for others, but in what we inspire them to do for themselves. Through all of this, I reflected on stories I'd read and women I'd met who had gone through similar journeys. One friend shared how her mother, after years of relying on her, enrolled in a class and learned to manage her own finances. Another spoke of her brother, who finally got a job and found purpose outside their old patterns of dependency. Change, I realized, is contagious. The courage to step back and reclaim your own life gives others permission to do the same. If there's a lesson here, it's that love deepens when you allow others to be responsible for their own happiness. True connection isn't about rescuing each other from every discomfort. It's about witnessing each other's growth and cheering each other on from the sidelines. For so long, I believed that being indispensable was the only way to belong. But it's a hollow kind of belonging, built on fear and exhaustion. The real joy comes when you are loved not just for what you do, but for who you are. With each new conversation, each small reconciliation, my confidence grew. I saw that my family was stronger than I'd given them credit for, and so was I. I began to trust that even if our relationships changed, they could still be rich, vibrant, and meaningful. There was less pressure now, more authenticity. I felt freer to share my thoughts, my boundaries, my dreams. I felt freer, period. The greatest gift in all of this was learning to let go of perfection. Our family wasn't flawless, and neither was I. We would always carry our quirks, our miscommunications, our rough edges. But for the first time, those imperfections felt like part of our story, not a sign of failure. I stopped measuring my worth by how much I could give, and instead found fulfillment in simply being present and listening, in laughing, in letting the moment be enough. As autumn faded to winter, I realized that healing was happening not in a sweeping gesture, but in 1,000 tiny shifts. Love had not disappeared when I set my boundaries. It had only changed shape, finding new ways to blossom and grow. I understood now that every step I took toward self-respect made space for new kinds of connection, not only with my family, but with myself. With this new understanding, I looked ahead with hope. There was one chapter left to write, learning to choose myself fully without guilt, and to carry that lesson into every relationship, old and new. The story of my family was far from over, but for the first time, I was eager to see how it would unfold. Looking back now, I see how every quiet turning point led me here to a life rebuilt not on sacrifice, but on the courage to choose myself. The journey wasn't simple, and it certainly wasn't painless. There were days when boundaries felt like barriers and nights when loneliness crept in like a tide. But each lesson shaped me. I learned the difference between being needed and being cherished, and how love, when freed from expectation, becomes something warmer and more enduring. I remember the first lonely dinner at that window table, the ache of realizing I'd been invisible in my own family story. I think of all those years I carried the invisible burden, organizing, rescuing, funding, fixing, hoping it would one day be enough. I see now that it never had to be. True worth isn't measured by the weight you carry for others, but by how bravely you learn to stand in your own light. Each time I set a boundary, each time I reclaimed a dream, I carved out space for myself, a space where joy could blossom without apology. This journey taught me that setting boundaries isn't an act of cruelty, but of compassion. By stepping back, I didn't just free myself, I made space for the people I love to grow. Watching Lily handle her own setbacks, seeing my mother share her stories instead of just her needs, and receiving Aunt Ruth's proud postcard from her travels All these moments proved that love can thrive even when the patterns change. When we stop rescuing others from every stumble, we give them the gift of discovering their own strength. Healing, I learned, isn't a finish line you cross, it's a practice renewed every day. There are still setbacks and moments of self-doubt, but with each new step, I choose to honor my own needs, trust my instincts, and believe that I am worthy of the care I so willingly gave to others. I'm no longer just the fixer or the background character in my family's tale. I am the author of my own story, finally unafraid to write myself a leading role. If you see yourself in any part of my journey, if you've ever felt invisible, overburdened, or lost in the web of other people's expectations, know that you're not alone. There's courage in every small act of self-respect, in every gentle no, in every moment you choose rest or joy or adventure just for you. Our stories matter not only for what they teach us, but for how they help others find the strength to change their own lives. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is simply to begin again. Before I go, I want to invite you into this conversation. If this story touched you, if you've faced a similar struggle, or learned something along the way, please share your experience in the comments below. Let's make this a space where no one feels invisible, where every act of courage, every lesson learned, and every step toward healing can inspire someone else. Your story, your voice is powerful. You never know whose heart you might touch. If you found value in this journey, I hope you'll join me for the next one. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss a new story. And don't forget to like and share this video with anyone who needs a reminder that it's never too late to choose yourself. Every comment, every new subscriber helps us build a community rooted in empathy, honesty, and hope. Together, we can rewrite the old stories and create new ones, filled with the kind of belonging and joy we all deserve. Thank you for walking this path with me. Until next time, take gentle care of yourself, and remember you are worthy of love from others, and most of all, from yourself.